In the 1980s, horror films weren't just entertainment. They were battlegrounds for morality, censorship, and free speech. Some were too bloody, too shocking, or too disturbing to survive their own premieres. These films didn't just scare audiences, they provoked outrage so intense they were yanked from theaters mid-run. Let's revisit the 13 most controversial 80s horror movies that couldn't stay on the screen. 1. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. Few films in history have been as polarizing as Cannibal Holocaust. Released in 1980, this Italian shocker by Ruggero Deodato billed itself as a found-footage documentary about a missing film crew in the Amazon. The result was so realistic, many believed it was a genuine snuff film. Adding to the infamy, the production included actual animal killings on screen, a decision that horrified audiences and animal rights groups worldwide. When the movie premiered in Italy, authorities arrested Deodato on suspicion of murder, forcing him to prove in court that the actors were still alive. Though he was cleared of that charge, the animal cruelty remained undeniable, sparking bans in over 50 countries. In the UK, it was swept up in this video nasties panic, its possession becoming a criminal offense. The controversy was so intense that many theaters either canceled showings after public protests or quietly pulled it from schedules, fearing legal trouble. For years, its reputation grew underground, traded on bootleg VHS tapes among horror collectors. Today, Cannibal Holocaust is both reviled and revered, condemned for its brutality, yet hailed by some as a milestone in extreme cinema. It's a reminder of how far filmmakers were willing to push boundaries and how far society was willing to push back. 2. Maniac, 1980. Maniac wasn't just violent, it was disturbingly intimate about it. Directed by William Lustig, the film followed a deeply troubled man who stalked and murdered women in New York City. What set Maniac apart from other slasher fare was its unflinching focus on the killer's perspective, often showing the murders in unsettling detail. Special effects legend Tom Savini delivered hyper-realistic gore, including a now infamous scene of a shotgun blast to the head that left audiences stunned. In the US, feminist groups protested its depiction of violence against women, calling for boycotts. In the UK, it quickly landed on the video nasties list, making it illegal to sell. Some American theaters, spooked by the backlash, pulled the film entirely after only a few days of screenings. Newspaper ads were pulled, TV spots were banned, and in some cities, the only way to see Maniac was through late-night underground screenings. The film's reputation only grew in the shadows, with horror fans praising its raw, grimy atmosphere and psychological horror, while critics decried it as exploitative garbage. Whether you see it as art or atrocity, Maniac is proof that sometimes the most frightening thing isn't the monster in the shadows. It's the one looking back at you in the mirror. 3. The Evil Dead, 1981. Sam Raimi's. The Evil Dead began as a low-budget passion project, but it became one of the most infamous horror films of the decade. Made with a shoestring budget and a cast of unknowns, the film follows a group of friends trapped in a cabin, unleashing demons from an ancient book. Its blend of relentless gore and supernatural terror drew immediate attention from censors. In the UK, it was one of the prime targets of the video nasties crackdown, with police raiding video stores to confiscate copies. While it wasn't technically banned in the US, some regional theaters refused to screen it after complaints from religious groups about its satanic content and extreme violence. Rather than dying quietly, the controversy fueled its cult status. Fans passed around worn VHS tapes, and word of mouth transformed it into a legend. Today, The Evil Dead is recognized as a masterpiece of DIY horror filmmaking, but back in 1981, it was considered so intense that even hardened horror audiences left the theater shaken. Its removal from some screens only made people want to see it more, proving that sometimes censorship can be the best marketing tool a horror film can get. 4. The Beyond, 1981. Italian director Lucio Fulci was already known for his gruesome zombie films, but The Beyond pushed his artistry and the patience of censors to the limit. Set in Louisiana, it tells the surreal, dreamlike story of a woman who inherits a hotel built over one of the 7 gates of hell. Fulci's signature blend of nightmare imagery and extreme gore was on full display, with scenes of eyes being gouged out, faces dissolved by acid, and corpses returning to life. In the US, the film was heavily censored for theatrical release, retitled as 7 Doors of Death. In the UK and parts of Europe, uncut screenings were quickly halted after public complaints, and some distributors voluntarily pulled it to avoid fines. For decades, the uncut version circulated only among hardcore horror fans, adding to its mythos. The Beyond is now hailed as one of the greatest Italian horror films ever made, a poetic, bloody fever dream. But in the early 80s, it was simply too much for mainstream audiences, and theaters had little choice but to close the doors on Fulci's vision. 5. Tenebrae, 1982. By 1982, Dario Argento was already a master of the giallo, a genre blending mystery, murder, and stylized violence. Tenebrae was meant to be his ultimate statement, a meta-thriller about an American writer stalked by a killer who seems inspired by his own work. But instead of being celebrated, the film became a lightning rod for controversy. Argento pushed the violence to new heights, staging elaborate murder sequences with balletic camera movements and shocking splashes of crimson. The most infamous moment, a double arm amputation by straight razor, blood spraying against a white wall, was considered one of the most graphic murders ever filmed at the time. In Italy, critics accused the movie of wallowing in sadism. In the UK, Tenebrae landed squarely on the video nasties list, and distributors faced legal threats. Some theaters that dared to screen it found themselves under siege by protesters who claimed it glamorized violence against women. Many pulled it after only a few showings, fearing fines or bad press. The irony? Argento always claimed the violence was a commentary on censorship itself, an exaggerated, almost absurd reflection of public fears about media corrupting morality. Over time, the movie has been reassessed as one of his most technically brilliant works, but in 1982, the backlash was so fierce it was effectively chased out of theaters. For Argento, it proved that sometimes the loudest critics are the ones who never stay to watch the ending. 6. Pieces, 1982. The advertising tagline for Pieces was infamous. It's exactly what you think it is. And the film delivered exactly that. A wildly gory Spanish-American slasher about a chainsaw-wielding killer assembling a human jigsaw puzzle from the bodies of women. Directed by Juan Piquer Simón, Pieces was unapologetically lurid, filled with explicit violence and outrageous death scenes. It didn't pretend to be art. It was exploitation in its purest form. That brazenness made it a cult hit among hardcore horror fans, but it also made it an easy target for moral outrage. When the film hit U.S. theaters in 1983, complaints poured in from shocked moviegoers who expected a standard slasher and instead got prolonged sequences of mutilation. Some newspapers refused to carry its ads. In Boston and several other cities, theater managers reported audience walkouts and picketing outside cinemas. Under mounting pressure, many theaters yanked it from their schedules within a week. In the UK, Pieces was swiftly seized under the Obscene Publications Act. Yet like many banned films of the 80s, its notoriety only grew underground. VHS bootlegs circulated at horror conventions, and whispers about its uncut version drew fans from across the globe. Today, Pieces is remembered as one of the most gleefully outrageous slashers ever made, proof that in the right or wrong hands, a chainsaw can be the most controversial movie prop in the world. 7. Silent Night, Deadly Night, 1984. No holiday horror film caused more public fury in the 1980s than Silent Night, Deadly Night. Released just before Christmas in 1984, it told the story of a young man traumatized by a childhood tragedy who grows up to don a Santa suit and go on a killing spree. The backlash began the moment the marketing hit TV. Parents were outraged at the sight of a killer Santa swinging an axe in commercials during family programming. The idea of turning the beloved figure of Saint Nick into a horror villain was seen as blasphemous. Within a week of release, protests erupted outside theaters across the U.S. Theatrical chains received thousands of complaint letters. News outlets fanned the outrage, with one critic calling it the most tasteless film of the year. Under intense pressure, TriStar Pictures pulled the movie from theaters entirely, an almost unheard-of move for a film that was making money. For years, Silent Night, Deadly Night existed as a VHS curiosity, whispered about by horror fans. Today, it's recognized as a cult classic and even spawned multiple sequels. But its brief theatrical life proved that in 1984, crossing the line between holiday cheer and horror was enough to get you erased from the marquee overnight. Eighth Guinea Pig, Flowers of Flesh and Blood, 1985. Technically a Japanese release, Flowers of Flesh and Blood didn't hit Western awareness until the mid-80s. And when it did, it caused an uproar like few others. The second entry in the Guinea Pig series, it depicted in excruciating detail a man dressed as a samurai abducting a woman and dismembering her piece by piece. The special effects were so convincing that the film was mistaken for a genuine snuff movie. The legend goes that actor Charlie Sheen saw a bootleg copy and reported it to the FBI, triggering an investigation. Only after the filmmakers demonstrated the prosthetics and techniques used was the matter dropped. In Japan, the film had limited underground circulation, but in the US and UK, it became the stuff of urban legend. A few specialty theaters attempted late-night screenings, but pulled them after local authorities threatened obscenity charges. The movie remains banned in several countries to this day. For horror collectors, it's a kind of forbidden grail. Not because it's scary in a supernatural sense, but because it tests the limits of what audiences can watch without looking away. In the mid-80s, those limits were enough to get it banned, pulled, and whispered about for decades after. 9. Make Them Die Slowly, 1985. Known internationally as Cannibal Ferox, Umberto Lenzi's Make Them Die Slowly was promoted with the audacious claim that it was banned in 31 countries. That wasn't entirely marketing hype. Many regions truly did pull the film from screens due to its extreme brutality. The story follows a group of Americans who venture into the Amazon jungle, only to be captured by cannibals. On paper, it's standard exploitation adventure fare, but Lenzi pushed the violence to almost unbearable extremes. Mutilations, impalements, and, most infamously, graphic scenes of animal cruelty were shown without restraint. In the UK, the film was quickly seized under the Obscene Publications Act and added to the notorious video nasties list. In the US, it played mostly in grindhouse theaters, but even those venues received pressure from local authorities and moral campaigners. In New York, one cinema pulled it mid-run after police warned of possible obscenity charges. Critics denounced it as cynical trash, accusing Lenzi of crafting a film purely for shock value. The director, however, defended it as an anti-drug, anti-violence morality tale, a claim few took seriously. While mainstream audiences recoiled, underground horror fans sought it out precisely because it was forbidden. For them, Make Them Die Slowly was a badge of defiance, proof that they could handle cinema's most extreme imagery. The movie's pull from many theaters only amplified that appeal, transforming it from a lurid jungle horror into one of the decade's most infamous banned films. 10. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, 1986. If Make Them Die Slowly shocked audiences with gore, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer disturbed them with its cold, clinical portrayal of violence. Directed by John McNaughton and loosely inspired by real-life murderer Henry Lee Lucas, the film follows Henry and his roommate Otis as they drift through life, killing with chilling detachment. There are no jump scares, no supernatural elements, just the terrifying mundanity of evil. The infamous home invasion scene, in which Henry and Otis videotape themselves murdering a family, was so unsettling that audiences frequently walked out. When it came time for release, the MPAA refused to grant it an R rating, insisting the film's tone was inherently disturbing, regardless of cuts. That meant most mainstream theaters wouldn't touch it. A handful of independent cinemas booked it, but public complaints, and in some cases, direct pressure from local authorities, led to cancellations. McNaughton had intended the film as a grim character study, not an exploitation flick, but its refusal to offer catharsis or punishment for its killers left many viewers shaken. Critics praised its realism, yet theaters feared its effect on audiences. Ultimately, Henry became a cult classic through limited screenings and VHS circulation. But in the late 80s, its matter-of-fact brutality was too much for mainstream venues, forcing it out of the spotlight and into the shadows, exactly where its subject matter belonged. 11. Nekromantik, 1987. Few films in history have provoked the sheer level of disgust that Jörg Buttgereit's Nekromantik did in 1987. A low-budget German production, it told the story of a man who works in corpse removal, steals a decomposing body, and brings it home for himself and his girlfriend to engage in necrophilic acts. Even in an era that had seen Cannibal Holocaust and make them die slowly, Nekromantik was a new frontier in taboo-breaking. Unlike typical gore films, the horror here wasn't about monsters or murder. It was about revulsion, crossing lines most people didn't even know cinema could cross. Buttgereit used a mix of genuine animal remains and disturbingly convincing props, giving the movie a sense of realism that left viewers unsettled long after the credits rolled. Germany's Film Classification Board refused to grant it an official rating, effectively banning it from mainstream theaters. A few independent venues dared to screen it, often as midnight programming for curiosity seekers. But those screenings were met with outrage from city officials and the public. In some cases, police arrived mid-show to shut down the projection. Critics were split. Some condemned it as pure filth, while a small circle of avant-garde supporters defended it as a provocative piece of art exploring death, love, and alienation. But regardless of intent, Nekromantik was too disturbing for general audiences. Its notoriety only grew in underground film circuits, where bootleg VHS copies fetched high prices. Over the years, it has become a cult artifact, a movie people claim to have seen as a badge of extreme viewing endurance. But in 1987, it wasn't a cult treasure. It was a film that could get your theater shut down by sunrise. 12. Hellraiser, 1987. When Hellraiser hit theaters in 1987, it wasn't the typical slasher horror audiences were used to. Written and directed by Clive Barker, it introduced the world to the Cenobites, demonic beings summoned through a mysterious puzzle box, blending themes of pain, pleasure, and damnation in ways cinema had never shown. The movie's imagery was relentlessly graphic, hooks tearing into flesh, skin being flayed, and grotesque transformations. While it found a distributor in the US, some theater chains balked at its sadomasochistic undertones. In certain conservative regions, community groups and religious leaders called for boycotts, claiming the movie glamorized violence and perversion. A few theaters in the American South and Midwest pulled the film after opening weekend, citing both moral complaints and a surprising number of audience walkouts. In the UK, though it escaped outright banning, it faced significant scrutiny from local councils, and some cinemas refused to book it altogether. Despite the pushback, Hellraiser developed a strong fan base almost immediately. Critics admired Barker's imaginative world-building and philosophical approach to horror, but admitted the visuals were among the most unsettling of the decade. Its removal from some venues only fed its legend, making it seem like a forbidden, dangerous work that had to be sought out. Over time, Hellraiser became one of the most enduring horror franchises in history, spawning sequels, comics, and countless imitators. But in 1987, it was a gamble, a movie that walked into theaters with nails in its head and walked out of some of them in chains. 13. Faces of Death, 1988 re-release. Originally released in 1978, Faces of Death was a pseudo-documentary that claimed to show real footage of death, disaster, and human cruelty. While much of it was staged, the filmmakers intercut convincing reenactments with genuine clips of accidents, executions, and animal slaughter. The combination made it one of the most notorious shock films in history. By the late 1980s, the home video boom and underground horror market had given Faces of Death a massive cult following. Sensing renewed interest, distributors decided to give it a limited theatrical re-release in 1988. But the social climate had changed. public sensitivity to violent imagery was high, and local governments were quick to act on complaints. In several U.S. cities, protests erupted outside theaters. Critics called it garbage exploitation and accused it of blurring the line between reality and performance in dangerous ways. Rumors swirled that some of the footage was genuine snuff, a claim the filmmakers denied but never fully dispelled. In certain markets, the backlash was so intense that theaters canceled screenings mid-run. Some owners reported police visits warning of potential obscenity violations, while others simply didn't want the bad publicity. In the UK, the movie was already banned as part of the video nasties list, so its 80s revival was dead on arrival there. For fans, the theatrical pull only added to its mystique. Bootleg copies became prized possessions, traded like contraband. The controversy ensured Faces of Death would be remembered less for its filmmaking quality and more for its aura of forbidden danger. Today, the film is acknowledged as a bizarre blend of staged horror and documentary-style morbidity, a relic of an era when simply showing something too real could get your movie thrown out of theaters. In 1988, that danger wasn't theoretical. It was exactly what happened. These films weren't just scary. They were lightning rods for moral panic, censorship, and outrage. Pulled from screens, chased underground, and whispered about for decades, they remind us that horror's most unsettling power lies in its ability to provoke. Which of these banned nightmares would you dare to watch? Like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments.